I'm Emma Carson, 34 years old, and I've never gotten used to the cold kind of silence that follows you into a house that used to feel like home. It wasn't snowing yet, but November had that sharp edge to it, the kind that slices through your coat and slips into your sleeves, like it owns the place. My son, Jack 9, walked beside me, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket, shoulders hunched. My daughter, Ella 5, clung to my hand, her tiny boots scuffing the walkway as we stepped onto the porch of my parents' home. I had a casserole dish balanced in my other arm, one I made from scratch the night before because for all our history, I still believed in showing up with something warm. Jack carried the pie like it was sacred pumpkin, his favorite, and my dad's too. That felt like something at least. I rang the doorbell once, then again. No answer. After a moment, I did what I always used to do, walked around to the back, past the frozen flower beds and the chipped garden gnome, and let myself in through the kitchen door. It creaked open with a familiar protest. The kitchen smelled the way it always did on Thanksgiving roasted turkey sage, that warm, sugary scent from the cinnamon glaze on my dad's ham. Everything was exactly the same, except no one looked up. My mother stood at the counter folding linen napkins into sharp, perfect triangles like she was preparing for guests far more important than me. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, but the real difference was in her eyes. They didn't lift, didn't soften, just kept folding. My dad stood by the window with a bourbon in hand, swirling it like he was waiting for the arrival of someone who mattered more. My sister Hannah was in the living room talking quietly with Uncle Bob. Claire, my oldest sister, the one who somehow always ended up being the center of attention without ever asking for it, was laughing with her husband Mitch near the fireplace. Their kids were already running through the house like it belonged to them. Jack held the pie with both hands. "Where should I put this, Mom Counter?" I said softly. He set it down next to a tray of deviled eggs. No one said thank you. No one even said hello. Claire looked over her shoulder finally and smiled tight polite. "Hey, Emma. You made it." I gave a half nod. "We brought dessert." "Oh, good. There's plenty of room." She turned back to the fireplace. I scanned the dining room 12 seats, elegant place settings, name cards in gold ink. I counted again. 12 chairs. No folding chairs from the garage, no kids' table, no high chairs. Just 12. I felt Ella tug gently at my coat. "Where do we sit, Mommy?" Claire heard her and turned back. "Oh, the kids can eat in the den," she said. "Like that solved something. We've got a movie playing in there and pizza. They'll have more fun anyway." No one asked the kids if that's what they wanted. No one looked at me for approval. It was like we'd arrived not as family but as an unexpected obligation someone forgot to cancel. I helped Ella out of her coat and led her and Jack down the hallway toward the den. Inside, there were paper plates stacked next to a pizza box, already cooling. A blanket was tossed across the couch, the TV playing a holiday cartoon at low volume. Jack sat stiffly on the edge of the couch. Ella leaned into me, eyes big. "Are we not sitting with them this year?" I brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "No, baby. Not this year." And for the first time I felt it, not anger, not yet. Just that quiet recognition that we'd been left out on purpose. And worse, no one even seemed to think we'd notice. Jack sat next to his sister on the couch holding a slice of pizza he didn't seem interested in eating. The crust sagged in his small hand, and his eyes flicked toward the doorway like he was waiting for someone to come in and tell him this was all just a misunderstanding. But no one came. I tucked the blanket over both of them, smoothing it across Ella's lap. She was already trying to pretend everything was fine, humming along to the cartoon on the TV with a too bright smile. She was 5. She didn't know what to name this kind of cold. "I'll be right back," I said softly. Neither of them answered. Jack just nodded without looking away from the screen. Back in the kitchen, the mood had shifted, not in my favor. Laughter now came easier. My dad was on his second or third drink, hard to tell, and Claire was retelling some story from her last family vacation in Italy, complete with over-the-top hand gestures and too loud laughter. Mom hovered nearby, nodding and topping off wine glasses. They looked relaxed, warm. I stood there, coat in hand, not quite sure what to do with myself. "I think we're going to head out after dessert," I said aloud, though it landed between conversations. Not loud, not angry, just factual. No one turned around. Then I heard it. Claire's voice light and laced with something sharper underneath. "Busy mom things, right?" she said, raising her glass. "Always rushing off." Her husband chuckled. "We get it. Single-parent life." The way she said it made it sound like a slogan, like a brand I had slapped onto myself to excuse being difficult or distant or ungrateful. My face didn't move. My hands didn't tremble. But my chest tightened in that slow, familiar way it did when I realized again that no one here saw me the way I wanted to be seen. Not as someone who showed up, not as someone who carried more than anyone ever asked her to. I walked to the counter and set down the casserole dish I'd brought, sliding it between a tray of untouched deviled eggs and a cranberry mold someone had clearly bought at the grocery store. No one commented. No one even looked. "Actually," I said, my voice low but steady, "I need to share something." That got their attention. Claire turned first, her wine glass halfway to her mouth. My mother's hands stilled over the napkins. My dad paused his drink mid-air. "I'm pulling back," I said, "from everything. The tuition help, the extra payments, the electric bill for the house, all of it." Silence. My father blinked, then set his glass down slowly, like he was trying to stall for time without saying a word. My mother looked at me like I'd just spoken in another language. "I thought you wanted to help," Hannah said quietly. She was the only one who didn't sound angry, just surprised. "I did?" I nodded. "And I still care. But I can't carry everything anymore." Claire let out a short breath, almost a laugh. "Since when is splitting a water bill considered carrying anything?" I looked at her. The same woman whose second mortgage had been co-signed with my name, who'd used my bank login last year to transfer funds in a pinch. But I didn't say any of that. I didn't list the receipts. Instead, I said, "I'm doing what's best for me and the kids. That's all." My mother finally spoke. "We never asked you to." That line, that sharp little sentence landed harder than I expected. It wasn't defensive, it was final. I didn't argue. There was nothing left to explain. I turned back toward the den where Jack and Ella sat side by side in a room that wasn't meant for them eating pizza. No one asked if they liked under the hum of a television that wasn't set to anyone's favorite. And that's when I knew for real, not just in theory, that this place wasn't mine anymore. Maybe it never had been. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because of the kids. They were out cold by the time we got home, Jack curled up with his library book still open across his chest, Ella clinging to her stuffed rabbit like it was the only thing that hadn't changed. No, I stayed awake because my brain wouldn't stop replaying every detail of that dining room. The 12 chairs, the gold-trimmed name cards, the absence of 3 plates. It wasn't just that we were left out. It was how easy it had been for them to do it. I found myself standing in the kitchen around 2 a.m., one hand wrapped around a mug of tea gone cold, the other flipping absently through unpaid bills on the counter. Rent, groceries, Ella's new school shoes. Life wasn't easy, but I'd made it work. I always did. And that's what made their indifference so unbearable. They never saw the work. Years ago when my dad had his heart surgery, it was me, not Claire, who took over the mortgage paperwork. I drove back and forth from the hospital every other day with my kids in the car parked in staff lots because visitor spots were always full. I fielded insurance calls, bank managers even helped Mom figure out how to refinance. I remember missing Jack's kindergarten open house because I was at the notary's office helping Dad sign documents. No one ever asked how I managed it. They just let me handle it because that's what I did. Then there was Claire, glamorous, charming Claire, who after blowing through her savings in some ill-advised startup scheme came crying to Mom and Dad. And who do you think they called not a bank? Me. Just until she gets back on her feet, Mom had said. I had money saved back then. Not a lot, but enough to feel like I had some breathing room. I drained nearly all of it covering Claire's rent for 4 months, her car note, and even the registration fees for her daughter's private school. Claire didn't thank me. She called once to say I got the Venmo thanks, and that was it. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was doing it for the family, that I was setting an example, that someday when things calmed down, someone would see it for what it was, but no one ever did. Instead, I became the too intense one, the cold one. The one who sent long emails about logistics and left voice messages with too many details. I became the utility. They'd even joked about it once at a barbecue 2 summers ago. Claire had laughed, wine in hand, and said, "Emma's like our CFO, right? She keeps the whole operation running." Everyone laughed. I smiled too, but something inside me cracked that day. Because I wasn't laughing. I was tired. So tired. And not just from the bills, or the calls, or the forms, but from being invisible while doing it all. Even when I did speak up when I mentioned once that Jack could really use a tutor, or that Ella's school fundraiser was falling short, my parents brushed it off. "I'm sure you'll figure it out," my dad said. "You always do." That was the problem? I always did. I carried everyone so well they forgot I was carrying anything at all. And that night, standing in the dark with tea gone cold and a savings account nearly empty, I realized I had built my identity around being helpful, hoping deep down that someday they'd see me. But all I had become was a solution in a family that never acknowledged the problem. I didn't set out to become the financial backbone of the family. It just happened. One crisis at a time. When Mom called crying because the roof started leaking during the first spring storm, I wired $200 the same afternoon. When Dad's truck broke down and they couldn't afford repairs, I put it on my emergency credit card and never asked for reimbursement. When Hannah was between jobs and couldn't make rent, I covered 2 months without hesitation. Each time I convinced myself it was temporary, that this wasn't who I was becoming, it was just a rough patch, a season of giving. But the seasons stretched into years, and I never stopped. At one point, I set up recurring transfers $250 on the 1st and 15th of each month to my parents' checking account. I told myself it made their lives easier. I told myself it kept the peace. And most of all, I told myself that they would have done the same for me if the roles were reversed. Now I'm not so sure. Claire, on the other hand, didn't have to give. She just had to show up. With her manicured nails, her breezy charm, her endless stories about marketing jobs that never seemed to last more than 6 months. Somehow, no matter how messy her life became, the family wrapped themselves around her like insulation. They made excuses, covered for her, protected her. I remembered one particularly sharp moment the day Claire casually mentioned over brunch that she'd added herself as an authorized user to one of Dad's credit cards. "Just in case of emergencies," she said with a shrug, like it was nothing. Mom didn't even blink. I once asked Dad gently if it bothered him. "She's figuring things out," he said. "She just needs more time. More time. More space. More chances." What did I need? What did they think I was made of? There was no safety net for me. No fallback plan. No one ever offered to split Jack's orthodontist bill or pitch in for Ella's school uniforms. I juggled freelance work, budgeted down to the cent, and sold furniture on Facebook Marketplace just to keep the lights on during that one winter where everything seemed to break at once. But I never said a word, because somewhere in my chest I still carried that twisted hope that my silence would earn me respect, that being low maintenance would make me worth something. That if I just kept proving I wasn't a burden, they'd start treating me like a blessing. Instead, I became expected to step in, expected to say yes, expected to solve problems no one else wanted to name out loud. And when I didn't, when I finally said I was pulling back, it wasn't surprise I saw in their eyes. It was annoyance, like I was breaking some unspoken contract I never agreed to. I looked back through my phone at old text threads. So many of them were one-sided. Me checking in, me offering help, me arranging schedules and sending reminders. No, how are you? No, do you need anything? Just request after request, assumption after assumption. And the worst part, I taught them to treat me this way. Every time I swallowed disappointment, every time I said yes out of guilt, every time I fixed what they broke without asking for thanks, I trained them to believe I was fine, that I didn't need help, that I didn't hurt. But I did, and I was beginning to understand that the person I needed to forgive first was me. I was halfway through updating our household budget when I noticed the daycare charge had jumped by nearly $400. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I double-checked the invoice, scrolled through past payments, and then called the center directly. "Looks like the tuition subsidy from your parents was removed this month," the administrator said kindly. "It had been applied every cycle since last year, but we were told to cancel it going forward." I remember holding the phone away from my ear for a second, staring at nothing in particular. I hadn't asked them to cover Ella's daycare, not at first. Mom had offered one afternoon when I'd mentioned I was struggling to take on a new project without part-time care. "Let us help," she'd said. "It's for our granddaughter." And just like that they had, until they didn't. No warning, no heads up, just cut. I asked the administrator if she knew when the change had been made. "Last month," she said. Right around the same time I'd noticed Claire had posted pictures from a new spa weekend. A full reset retreat with sunrise yoga and champagne brunch. Something tight snapped in my chest. They'd taken tuition help from my daughter and given it to a spa package, or maybe to cover one of Claire's endless emergencies. Either way they had chosen. And it hadn't been us. I didn't tell the kids. Ella still loved daycare, her finger-painted art, her stories at pickup about snack time and sharing games. I wasn't going to let her feel the anxiety I now carried like a second skin. But I felt it. Every morning I dropped her off every email from the center, every time I packed her backpack with healthy snacks and a change of clothes I had to wash every 2 days because I hadn't replaced her extras yet. It wasn't about the money, not really, it was about what the withdrawal meant. I had been useful until I wasn't. I had been supported until they needed that support elsewhere. The logic stung because it was so familiar. When I was a teenager, I remember Claire asking to borrow my car for one day so she could go to a college interview. That one day became a weekend, then a week. My name was still on the insurance, my gas tank still empty. But she had smiled, hugged me, said, "Thanks, you're the best," and moved on. It was always that way. Emma will understand. Emma will figure it out. Emma doesn't make a fuss. I had trained myself to believe that being the reliable one was a badge of honor. But now, in the quiet math of what had been taken from my children to benefit someone else, I realized it was just another way to erase me. The next time my mom called, and she did 3 days later, I didn't pick up. Her voicemail was light casual. "Hey, honey, just checking in. Haven't heard from you. Hope everything's okay with the little ones. Call me when you get a minute." She didn't mention the daycare. She didn't ask about the Thanksgiving dinner. She didn't notice I hadn't replied to Claire's group text. But most of all, she didn't ask how I was doing. Not really. And that was when I started to believe something I'd always tried to push away. Maybe they only saw me clearly when I was offering something. And if I stopped offering, would they even see me at all? I used to think I was the strong one. That's what people told me at work, at the kids' school, even in passing at the grocery store, when they saw me juggling 2 kids and 3 grocery bags while answering a call with my shoulder. "I don't know how you do it," they'd say, with a sympathetic smile, as if admiration could replace actual support. But strength, I've learned, is just what people call it when they're used to watching you survive without complaining. And I had become an expert at surviving, at staying silent. I had smiled through parent-teacher conferences alone, sat in the back at Claire's baby shower while our mother gushed about how radiant she looked, stood at the edge of family photos holding Ella while everyone else smiled in neat little pairs. I never asked for space, never demanded to be seen. I thought staying small was noble, that if I asked for less, it would mean more when they offered. But no one ever offered. And now all the things I thought were generous, the money sent the favors done, the holidays managed, felt like bricks in a wall I'd built around myself. A wall that kept them out, sure, but also kept me locked inside a version of myself who didn't believe she was allowed to say no. The day I turned off the automatic transfers to my parents' account, my hand hovered over the button. It was just $500 a month. That's what I told myself. What they told me. "It's not much," Mom had once said. "Just helps with the little things like gas, groceries, the heating bill," until I realized they weren't tracking how much it helped them. But I was tracking every cent it took from me. I clicked the cancel button and waited. No one called. No one noticed, or at least they didn't mention it. Instead, 2 days later, I got a text from Claire. "Claire Carson, hey, Mom says you might be going through something. Let me know if you want to talk or need a girls' night, LOL." The kind of message that pretends to be a lifeline, but feels more like a fishing line baited shallow and performative. I stared at it for a while, thumb hovering over the keyboard. I could have responded, could have laid it all out in neat rows, the daycare funding, the second mortgage, the birthday calls they forgot. But what would have changed? So I didn't reply. I archived the thread and turned off my phone. That night, Jack asked me if he could take leftover casserole in his lunch. From Thanksgiving, I asked, surprised. He nodded. It was really good. Better than the turkey. My eyes stung a little. I hadn't thought anyone noticed. Sure, I said. You can take as much as you want. Then he asked, are we going back next year? I paused at the sink, a plate in my hand. The water was running warm, the kind of detail that made everything else feel sharper by contrast. Probably not, I said gently. He nodded again. Okay. And that was it. No questions. No complaints. Just quiet acceptance from a boy who'd already seen enough to understand what didn't need saying. Later that night, when I tucked Ella into bed, she whispered, I like it better when it's just us. And I realized maybe I wasn't weak for walking away. Maybe I was finally strong enough to stop proving I belonged to people who never once made space for me at their table. The casserole dish came back untouched. I found it the next morning wrapped haphazardly in aluminum foil, shoved to the back of the fridge. I hadn't remembered bringing it home, but there it was, wedged behind a half-empty carton of orange juice and a takeout box I didn't recognize. I stared at it for a long time before pulling it out and setting it on the counter. The pie was gone, of course. Claire loved pumpkin. That detail stuck in my chest like a splinter, small but deep. They had eaten the pie Jack carried in both hands, the one he had helped me make, carefully measuring cinnamon and nutmeg, but they hadn't touched what I made, the thing I'd brought as a gesture of effort, of presence, of love. It shouldn't have mattered, but it did. I took a breath and peeled back the foil. It was still intact, perfectly browned on top, the way Mom used to like it when I was a kid. I stared at it for a moment before scraping the entire thing into the trash. Jack came into the kitchen halfway through. He didn't say anything, just leaned against the doorway and watched. You okay? He asked after a moment. I nodded, even though I wasn't. Yeah, just cleaning out some space. He nodded too and opened the cupboard for a bowl. Cereal clinked into porcelain, and the quiet between us was almost comfortable. Almost. Later that day, while Ella was down for her nap and Jack was absorbed in a library book on the couch, I opened my laptop and pulled up my bank account. I had the numbers memorized, but seeing them made it feel more real. No more outgoing transfers, no more quiet obligations, just me, our rent, our bills, and the slow, careful road back to stability. Until my phone buzzed. Rachel. I stared at her name for a moment before swiping to answer. Hey, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Hey, she replied. There was a long pause, and I could tell she wasn't sure how to begin. Just wanted to check in. Things felt tense last week. Tense. That was generous. I noticed I said softly, Look, I didn't know they didn't set places for you and the kids. If I had... It's fine. I cut in. It happened, and I saw what I needed to see. Rachel was quiet. Then she sighed. I think you're right to step back, but they're not taking it well. I almost laughed. Of course they're not. They're losing their emergency exit. That's not fair, isn't it? I asked, sharper than I meant. When have they ever called me just to talk, to check in without needing something? She didn't answer. That's what I thought. I'm just saying Rachel said finally it's not that simple. It is to me. Another pause. Claire's been having some trouble. I waited. She took out a credit line, Rachel continued. Against Mom and Dad's house, without telling them. I sat down slowly, the edge of the couch pressing into the backs of my knees. How much? Almost 20 grand. And now there's issues. Missed payments. Late notices. I think the bank's threatening action. Let me guess, I said, my voice suddenly hollow. Now they're calling me. Rachel didn't answer right away. They didn't want to, she said quietly, but they're scared. They don't know how to fix it. And Claire's just... Claire, she's acting like it's not a big deal. I closed my eyes. Of course. It was never about me, not really. It was about the role I played, the person who came in and solved things, the glue, the fixer. You don't have to get involved, Rachel added almost as an afterthought. I just thought you should know. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Thanks for telling me. Emma, I've got to go, I said gently. Jack needs help with his science project. He didn't. He was still curled on the couch flipping pages. But I needed the out. Okay, she said. Talk soon. I didn't answer. I just ended the call and set the phone down beside me. Outside, the wind moved through the bare branches like breath, sharp and unrelenting. Something had cracked. And it wasn't just their foundation, it was mine. The next morning, I found Jack sitting at the kitchen table before the sun had fully risen. His cereal sat untouched milk going warm. He was staring at his tablet, but not really reading. You're up early, I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. He shrugged. Didn't sleep much. I sat down across from him, studying his face. His eyes looked tired in a way that didn't match his age. What's on your mind? I asked. He hesitated. Then, in a voice that barely rose above a whisper, he asked, Are we going to help them? I knew what he meant. I didn't need context. I reached out and rested my hand on top of his. What do you think? He bit his lip. You always help people, even when they don't help you back. I felt that in my chest, not because he was wrong, but because he was so heartbreakingly right. I smiled softly. I used to think that's what made me a good person, that if I gave enough, they'd love me more. His brows furrowed. Did it work? No, I said. Not really. Jack looked down at his cereal, poking it with his spoon. So what now? I squeezed his hand. Now we do what's best for us. That's what I promised you and Ella, remember? He nodded slowly. It wasn't just a conversation. It was a moment, a quiet, pivotal shift where I realized my son was learning from how I responded to the people who hurt me. I wasn't just protecting him. I was teaching him what love should look like. Later that afternoon, I got a voicemail from my mom. Hi, Emma. Just calling. We're trying to sort through some things with the house. There have been some complications. Nothing serious, just, well, your father thought maybe you'd have some advice. Call me when you can. No apology, no acknowledgement of Thanksgiving, no mention of Ella's daycare tuition being pulled, just a request disguised as casual concern. I deleted the voicemail. That night, while folding laundry, I found a pair of Ella's socks with tiny holes near the toes. I made a mental note to replace them, then paused. A year ago, I would have bought Claire's daughter a birthday dress from a boutique store. I had. The receipt was still somewhere in my inbox. And now, I was patching socks instead of replacing them because I'd spent so long cushioning everyone else's life that I hadn't left enough for ours. Rachel showed up the next day with a folder in hand. She didn't knock, just waited outside the door until I opened it. I brought something, she said, holding the folder out like it weighed more than paper. I stepped aside and let her in. She didn't sit, just hovered by the kitchen counter while I made tea. The kids were at school. The house was quiet, the kind that could feel either peaceful or lonely, depending on how much you'd slept the night before. Rachel set the folder down gently. It's everything. Bank statements, foreclosure notice letters from the mortgage company. Claire. She didn't tell them about the second loan. Of course she didn't. They only found out because the bank sent a default letter, she added. I took a breath, opened the folder, and skimmed the top page. The numbers blurred slightly, but the gist was clear. The house was in trouble. Deep trouble. Not a rumor, not a misunderstanding. A timeline, and I was being asked to stop it. You don't have to fix it, Rachel said quickly. They're scared. I thought you should know how bad it really is. I nodded. I appreciate that. You always had a way of calming them down, she added. Of organizing things. My throat tightened. I wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a warning. I'm not angry, I said finally, but I'm also not your safety net anymore. Rachel looked at me for a long time. Okay, she said. I hear you. But her eyes looked like she still hoped I'd change my mind. Rachel didn't stay long. After she left the folder on the counter, she lingered for a minute, her eyes scanning the apartment like she was trying to map where she used to fit in my life. Then she murmured, "You really made this place feel like home," and walked out before I could respond. I didn't tell her the kids had done most of that work. After the door closed, I stood in the middle of the kitchen, the folder still unopened beside me. I didn't touch it. I didn't move, just stared at the closed door and let the stillness settle over me like dust. I should have felt vindicated. They needed me now after pushing me aside, but all I felt was tired. Not the kind of tired sleep fixes, but the kind that lives in your bones, the kind you carry in your spine and your jaw in your silence. That evening, Jack noticed I was moving slower than usual. I'd slammed a cabinet door louder than I meant to. Not angry, just brittle. He wandered in sock-footed, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "They're in trouble, huh?" he asked. I didn't even try to pretend. I nodded. "Are we going to help them?" That question again. Same tone, same weight. And still no easy answer. I knelt beside him, one hand on his back. "We're going to do what's best for us," I said. "That's what I promised." He leaned into me, warm and trusting. That's what gutted me the most, how quickly he offered comfort, how instinctively he tried to make room for my pain. In the past, I would have been halfway across town already, laptop open, crisis plan drafted, phone calls queued. I would have printed spreadsheets, made payment arrangements, spoken to loan officers like I was part of the family's legal team. But now I was sitting on the kitchen floor holding my son, watching the tea kettle steam, and choosing for the first time not to move. They had built a house of glass around Claire, convinced the sun rose and set in her hands, and now that it cracked, they wanted me to fix it. But I had stopped bringing glue to a place I was never invited to sit. I went to bed early that night, not out of peace, but necessity. When I woke up the next morning, the folder was still on the counter. I moved it to a drawer next to expired coupons and spare batteries. Maybe. That Sunday, my phone rang before sunrise. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew. My fingers hovered before I picked up. Emma Rachel's voice was flat tired. "They might lose the house this week." I stared at the wall. My fingers tightened around the phone. "What do you want me to do, Ra?" She hesitated. Then, "Just come by. Talk to them. Maybe they'll listen if you're there." I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. The role she wanted me to play hadn't changed. I was still the calm one, the reasonable one, the voice of logic they never respected until they needed it. "They don't need money," she rushed to say. "They just need help negotiating." Your calm voice. "Your logic?" I exhaled slowly. "You mean the things they always called too cold, too intense, too much?" Rachel didn't deny it. "I'll think about it," I said, though we both knew that probably meant no. That evening she showed up again. This time she didn't bring donuts. Just her presence, her eyes a little red, her hair undone. She held out a handwritten note from our mom, folded twice like a secret. "I'm just the messenger," she said, almost apologetic. "Don't shoot me." "I'm not angry," I said, and I meant it. I really wasn't. I just wasn't available. She opened her mouth to say something else, but I held up a hand. "I'm done being useful only when it hurts me." Rachel's shoulders dropped. She didn't argue. Not really. But as she placed the note on the counter and turned to leave, her voice shifted. "So that's it? You're just out?" I shook my head. "I'm not out," I said. "I just stopped showing up where I'm unwelcome." Rachel didn't walk out angry, just quiet. She left the note folded neatly on the counter next to the unopened folder. She didn't say goodbye, didn't ask for a hug, just nodded like something inside her had finally accepted what mine already knew: the old version of me was gone. After she left, I didn't read the note. Not right away. Instead, I made grilled cheese for dinner, cut the crusts off for Ella, and helped Jack find his missing science fair report under the couch. We watched a movie the three of us had already seen twice, and when Ella fell asleep halfway through, Jack reached for the remote and turned down the volume without being asked. Life had become quieter since Thanksgiving, and not just in noise but in expectations. There were no new group texts from Claire, no voicemails from Dad, no cheerful just checking in calls from Mom. It was as if I'd slipped into a different time zone, one they didn't bother to sync their clocks with anymore, and strangely it felt good. I didn't realize how much energy I'd spent bracing for their next need until the silence came. It wasn't cold, it was clean. 2 days later, I received a call from Ella's daycare. Not about tuition this time, but about paperwork. We were just updating emergency contacts, the director said. Both your parents are still listed, but the numbers bounced back. Would you like us to remove them? My throat tightened. They had once insisted on being the backups just in case. Dad had made a show of it, calling himself the emergency grandpa with a wink and a joke. Now, not even reachable. Yes, I said. Remove them. After I hung up, I opened my email and checked Jack's school account. Same situation. I updated both profiles, added my neighbor instead. Someone who actually noticed when my kids were sick. Someone who showed up. The next day, I got a courtesy call from my old bank. The manager's voice was polite, but I recognized the tone awkward, obligated. Hi, Ms. Carson. I just wanted to flag some unusual activity related to the Carson family home. You're still listed as a secondary on some documents from when your father refinanced during his medical leave a few years ago. I closed my eyes. I remembered that year too well, taking time off work, dragging 2 kids to a notary's office and signing without asking too many questions. What kind of activity, I asked. There's been a withdrawal of roughly $19,000, she said, and an additional request for extension was submitted last month, without your signature. I felt the pressure behind my eyes, not anger, exactly more like exhaustion in the shape of disbelief. Who submitted it? I asked, though I already knew. Claire Carson. Of course. Is there legal action being taken? I asked. No, the manager said, but the home is now under active foreclosure review. After I hung up, I walked to the kitchen, pulled out the folded note Rachel left, and finally read it. It wasn't long. My mother's handwriting was shaky, more rushed than usual. It was part memory, part regret, part logistical scramble, but one line stood out. We didn't mean to hurt you. We just didn't know where you fit anymore. Not forgotten, not ignored, just misplaced. I folded it again and placed it back in the drawer with the folder out of sight. That night, Jack came into the kitchen while I was rinsing dishes. Are we really not going back? He asked. I shook my head. Not unless something changes. He nodded slowly. Good. I like it better here. I dried my hands, knelt, and hugged him. Not just because he needed it, but because I did too. For so long I had waited to be chosen, waited for a place at their table. But what I'd finally realized was that I didn't need an invitation to belong. I just needed to stop asking for one. The next time the doorbell rang, I wasn't expecting it. It was early, barely past 8 on a Thursday, and I had just gotten Ella's lunch packed. Jack was still brushing his teeth, humming some pop song under his breath. For a split second, I thought it might be Rachel again. But when I opened the door, it wasn't her. It was my father. He stood there, hat in his hands, wearing the same brown coat he'd had since I was a teenager. The sight of him was jarring, not because I hadn't seen him in months, but because he looked smaller, thinner, tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. He said my name like it was the first word of a sentence he didn't know how to finish. Emma. I didn't speak. I just stepped aside. He walked in slowly, like the air in my apartment felt unfamiliar. He didn't sit, just glanced around at the hallway photos, Jack's science fair ribbon, Ella in her astronaut Halloween costume pictures he hadn't asked for, hadn't commented on, hadn't framed himself. You've done well, he said after a moment. I waited. He seemed to expect a thank you. Instead, I asked, Why are you here? He hesitated, then cleared his throat. Your brother... Well, Claire. She wasn't ready. We didn't see it until things got out of hand. I said nothing. Let him sit in that truth. She's overwhelmed. And your mother... He paused, avoiding my eyes. She wanted to come, but she's embarrassed. Embarrassed she didn't invite us to dinner, or embarrassed she needs me now? I asked. He flinched, just slightly. We never meant to shut you out, he said. It just got complicated. Complicated. The word landed like a paper cut. Small, sharp, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. My choices made things harder, I said flatly. That's what you mean, right? He looked at me then. Really looked. You always did what you thought was best, even when we didn't understand it. No, I said. I always did what was best for everyone else, hoping someone might notice, hoping it would finally mean I belonged. He opened his mouth to respond, but I kept going. You built a system where I only mattered when I was useful, and now that the system failed, you've come looking for a patch, not a daughter. His jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. I'm not here to argue, he said. I'm here to ask if there's anything you can do. Just anything. He didn't say to help us. He said to do, like this was a task on a checklist, a favor owed. I stepped closer, not to comfort, but to be clear. I was there, I said. Every holiday, every bill, every meltdown. You just didn't see me. He looked away. I was there. I repeated softer this time. You just saw clearer when I was gone. The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was hollow, like a room long emptied of furniture, but still echoing with memories. When he finally moved to leave, he didn't take the note, didn't pick up the folder, didn't press his case again. He just nodded, the kind of nod men give when they've run out of words, but can't admit they were wrong. I didn't walk him to the door. After he left, I turned off the porch light. I stood in the dim kitchen for a while, letting the quiet settle back in. It didn't feel like loneliness anymore. It felt like choice. It took less than a week for the silence to return, not the comfortable kind I'd learned to cherish, but the loaded kind. The kind that hums under your skin, that lets you know something is still coming. Rachel texted me a photo on Monday morning. No caption. Just the front of my parents' house, the one I grew up in, with a bright orange foreclosure notice taped across the front door like a scarlet letter. The windows were drawn shut. The paint near the porch rail was chipping, and the door, the one I used to sneak in through after curfew, was slightly ajar like it had given up resisting. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. I stared at the image longer than I meant to until the screen dimmed and went black in my hand. Jack noticed something was off. He was too observant for his age, always watching me, always listening between the lines. You okay? He asked that night, setting his school bag down more gently than usual. I nodded. Just tired. He didn't press. He never did. But I saw the understanding in his eyes anyway. That same night, I found myself standing at the edge of the hallway, looking at the photos we'd hung over the last few months. They were nothing fancy, just a collection of moments that mattered. Jack holding his reading medal, Ella with sticky fingers, after her first baking project, the three of us at the park, laughing tangled together like roots. There were no photos from the old house. None of the big family dinners, none of Claire's birthdays or Hannah's baby shower, or the annual 4th of July barbecues where I manned the grill while everyone else posed for group shots. At first, I'd meant to print some. I'd even picked out frames, but they never made it to the wall. And now I realized they never would. The next morning, I checked the mailbox and found a letter. Handwritten. No return address. Just my name. I knew the handwriting instantly. Mom. It was 4 pages long, dense, cursive, tight margins. No greeting. No. Dear Emma. Just words pouring out like someone had finally been cornered by the weight of their own choices. It wasn't quite an apology. Not quite anything, really. She wrote about missing my laugh, about how Ella reminded her of me at that age, sharp and curious and stubborn, in all the ways she didn't know how to love properly. She mentioned the cinnamon glaze I used to help her make, how the recipe didn't taste right this year, even though she followed it perfectly. There was one line that stuck with me. We didn't mean to hurt you. We just didn't know where you fit anymore. That sentence did something to me. Not because it hurt, but because it confirmed what I had already suspected. I hadn't been hated. I'd just been misfiled, misplaced, categorized as strong, then forgotten when I cracked. I folded the letter and slid it into the drawer next to the folder Rachel had left. I didn't throw it away, but I didn't read it again. That night, when Jack and Ella were asleep, I sat by the kitchen window and watched the porch light from the building across the street flicker in and out. The wind pushed leaves against the curb. The world moved on quietly, whether we were ready or not. For the first time in a long while, I didn't brace for the next call, the next crisis. And for the first time ever, I didn't feel guilty about it. A few days later, Jack came to me with a quiet request. Can we change the hallway wall? I was rinsing out a mug, the steady sound of water making the silence between us feel less sharp. I turned to face him, drying my hands with a dish towel. What do you mean? He pointed toward the photo arrangement just outside the living room, the one with the mix of snapshots, school portraits, and doodles Ella had taped up over time. The pictures, he said. The old ones. With them. I followed his gaze. A few photos remained ones from years ago when we were still part of a larger story. A birthday party where Claire had insisted on matching outfits. A blurry group shot from Thanksgiving 4 years back, one where Mom was holding Ella as a baby, but my hand had been cropped out of the frame. Jack didn't speak again. He didn't have to. I knew what he was asking. Okay, I said softly, we can change it. That afternoon, while Ella was napping, we took the frames down one by one. Jack helped unscrew the hooks while I laid them gently on the floor. We dusted the wall clean, wiped away fingerprints. It felt like a ritual, like shedding something old and heavy. We didn't cry. We didn't say anything sentimental. We just moved forward. Together. We printed new photos, ones that reflected our life now. Ella jumping in a pile of autumn leaves, Jack holding a tiny trophy from the library's summer reading challenge. A selfie the three of us had taken on the couch mid-laughter, no one looking directly at the camera. That one we printed large. I placed it in the center of the wall, framed in white wood. No caption, no dates. Just us. Later, while Ella colored at the coffee table and Jack read on the rug, I scrolled through old group messages. Most had gone silent. A few had new replies, Claire dropping a link to a GoFundMe campaign with vague language helping the family stay afloat. No names, no details. My name wasn't mentioned. Neither were my kids. I locked my phone and set it screen down on the kitchen counter. The red notification light kept blinking steady and slow like a heartbeat I no longer had to respond to. That night, as I tucked Ella into bed, she pointed to the new photo wall. "That's my favorite," she said, pointing to the center picture. "Because everyone's happy." "We are," I said, brushing her hair back. "We really are. Even if it's just us," she asked, her voice small. "Especially because it's just us." She smiled and turned toward her pillow. I stood in the hallway for a while after that, looking at the wall, the white frame, the clean layout, the absence of anyone who had once made me feel like I had to earn my place. This new version of our family, it wasn't curated, it wasn't traditional, and it sure wasn't polished, but it was real. It was safe. It was chosen. And for the first time in my adult life, I felt chosen too, not by them, but by myself. That was enough. The next message came from Claire. It wasn't a call, not even a text. It was a DM on Instagram buried under a filter request and a skincare ad. "Claire Carson. Hey, just a heads up, Dad and Mom moved in with me. House stuff got messy. Might be good to catch up soon. Let me know." No punctuation, no apology, no acknowledgement of the gravity of what she'd done. Just a casual, chirpy update as if she were announcing a brunch plan or a new playlist. I stared at the message for a full minute, feeling the weight of everything unsaid pressing behind the screen. Not "how are you not, we miss you." Just heads up. I didn't reply. I didn't even screenshot it. I set the phone face down on the counter and walked away. That night, the kids fell asleep early. I didn't turn on the TV, didn't scroll, didn't clean. Just stood in the quiet kitchen, leaning against the counter, feeling the familiar hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the old wall clock. The world was still spinning. We were still breathing. But everything else had shifted. They were officially out of the house. The one I grew up in. The one they had defended and preserved and painted 3 times in 10 years just to match Claire's taste. The one they wouldn't sell when I suggested downsizing, but now had lost because they'd trusted the wrong daughter. And suddenly it was clear. They had never been afraid of losing shelter. They were afraid of losing face. The neighbors, the church, the people who used to compliment Mom's landscaping or ask Dad about his barbecue rub recipe. That's what they were grieving, not the home itself, but the image of stability they had clung to like gospel. They had built their pride on appearances, and now that the veneer had cracked, they wanted me to come polish it again. But I wasn't that girl anymore. A few days passed with no word from anyone. Then Rachel called again. I didn't answer, but she left a voicemail. "Hey, so, the GoFundMe isn't going well. I guess people are asking questions we don't really have answers for. Dad's sleeping on the pull-out couch. Mom's miserable. Claire's being Claire. Just, If you have any ideas, she trailed off. Didn't finish the sentence. Didn't say goodbye. I didn't press play on the rest. I already knew the chorus. The family who once thought I was too much now needed exactly what I'd always offered: clarity, composure, and a plan. And still, they couldn't bring themselves to say they were wrong. They just wanted me to fix it. Like always. I made tea instead, sat by the window with my mug cupped in both hands, watching the street outside stay quiet. I thought about that house, how many times I'd driven up its gravel driveway, groceries in the trunk, hope in my chest. I thought about how many holidays I'd spent standing in that kitchen, invisible, except for what I brought to the table. And now, the table was gone. That night, Ella called out from her room in her sleep. I patted down the hall and peeked in. She had kicked off her blanket, tangled in the sheets. I tucked her in again, kissed her forehead. Her breathing slowed. In that moment, I realized she would never remember the feeling of being excluded that Thanksgiving, but she would remember this me being here, present, safe. And that was the only legacy I cared to pass on. The next knock came on a Wednesday afternoon, just after I'd gotten off a Zoom call for work. I was still in leggings and a half-wrinkled cardigan, the kitchen smelling faintly of toast and strawberry jam. I opened the door and froze. It was my father. Again. But this time, he wasn't holding a hat or leading with my name. He just stood there, empty-handed, like a man who had already been turned away once, and wasn't sure if he could survive another. "Can I come in?" he asked. I didn't say yes. I just moved aside. He stepped in slowly, like he was crossing into unfamiliar territory. Maybe he was. He glanced around the apartment like it had grown since the last time. Or maybe he was just seeing it clearly for the first time, how clean it was, how simple, how filled with things that mattered and nothing that didn't. He didn't sit. He hovered by the hallway, eyes drifting across the framed photos. Jack's school awards, Ella in her mismatched socks holding a paper crown, the three of us on the couch laughing about something no one remembers but none of us could forget. "You've built a life here," he said. "I have." He nodded once, looked down at his hands. "Your mother, she didn't want me to come. She said we've already asked too much." I waited, but I told her I'd try one more time, just to see. If maybe... He didn't finish the sentence. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he knew there was nothing left to bargain with. He looked older than I remembered, not just tired, smaller somehow, like the weight of the past few months had pressed down on him until he began to fold. I read the letter, I said quietly. His shoulders stiffened. She meant it. I believe that I replied. But meaning something and doing something are two very different things. He didn't argue. Instead, he finally said, "You're right. About all of it." The words hung in the air like something sacred. He continued, "We leaned on you too much, took advantage of your quiet. Thought. Maybe because you didn't yell you weren't hurting." I nodded. "You mistook my silence for strength. But I was just trying not to drown." He winced. "I never wanted to be the problem child," I said, "so I became the solution. And once I did, it's all I was allowed to be." He didn't look at me when he asked, "Is there anything we can do to fix it?" I looked at him, really looked. At the man who taught me to change a tire, to check the oil, to hold a door open for strangers, but never taught me how to say I'm hurt without apologizing afterward. "No," I said softly, "but you can stop pretending like I was never there." He finally sat on the edge of the couch, knees apart, hands clasped like he was still waiting for permission to rest. "You were always there," he murmured. "I just didn't know how to say thank you." "That's because you were never supposed to," I said. "In your mind, I owed you." He didn't deny it. He didn't nod either. When he finally stood up to leave, he didn't ask me to come back. He didn't hand me a folder or a plea. He just said, "You're a good mom." I didn't reply, but I watched as he walked to the door slower than before, and when he stepped out, I didn't follow. I closed the door gently, turned the lock, then turned back toward the hallway where Ella's drawing of our family still hung in crayon on the wall. 3 figures holding hands, a crooked sun in the corner. It didn't feel like something was missing anymore. It felt complete. The quiet in our apartment felt different now, not empty, not heavy, just ours. I started waking up before the alarm again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The mornings were soft, unhurried. I'd make coffee while Ella sang nonsense songs in the hallway, and Jack read cereal boxes like they were novels. The chaos had thinned. The dread was gone. Life didn't look impressive from the outside. The fridge hummed too loudly. The linoleum in the kitchen peeled at the corners. The heater clanked when it started up, especially at night. But it was real. It was honest. And for the first time in a long time, it was enough. I stopped checking my phone every hour. I stopped waiting for another message, another crisis, another emotional debt disguised as checking in. The silence from my family had become steady now, predictable, like background noise I no longer had to interpret. There were still traces of them, of course. Dad's handwriting on old forms, a casserole dish I never returned, a Christmas ornament Claire gave Ella 3 years ago that I hadn't had the heart to toss. But none of it hurt anymore. It was just residue. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring out the window with a cup of tea, watching the neighborhood move at its own pace. Kids walking to school, dogs tugging their owners down icy sidewalks, a man from the building across the street shoveling snow from his stoop, stopping to sip from a travel mug. This was the world now. Smaller, maybe, but truer. One evening, I caught Jack rearranging his bookshelf. He made room on the top row for a picture of the 3 of us, the same one we'd framed for the hallway. He didn't say anything, just dusted it gently and kept going. And I realized he was building his idea of home in real time. Brick by brick. Not with borrowed traditions or broken loyalty, but with choices. With peace. A few nights later, Ella climbed into my lap while I was folding laundry. She didn't ask, just climbed up with her stuffed rabbit and settled in her little legs dangling over my knees. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice soft against my sweater. "Do we still love them?" I froze, one of Jack's shirts half folded in my hands. She wasn't asking out of anger. There was no bitterness in her voice, no resentment, just quiet curiosity, the kind that only lives in children too young to understand the weight of adult choices. I didn't answer right away. I brushed her hair back, tucking a curl behind her ear. "I think love can stay," I said finally, "even if we don't visit as much." She nodded slowly, like she was storing the answer somewhere deep. "But what if they don't love us back?" she asked. I looked down at her, my heart twisting. "Then we love ourselves more." She was quiet for a moment. Then, almost like a decision had clicked into place, she whispered, "Okay." And just like that, she went back to humming, resting her head on my shoulder, the moment already absorbed into her small, resilient heart. But for me, it lingered, because that was the real grief, wasn't it? Not the loss of family, but the realization that love wasn't always safe. That sometimes the people who raised you only loved the version of you that didn't need too much, that didn't say no. I'd spent years shrinking to fit into the space they made for me. Quieting my voice, dimming my needs, carrying weight without complaint. And in return, I was offered presence, but not connection, obligation, but never warmth. Now I was learning how to love without that old hunger, without chasing it, without proving myself. Love that didn't require sacrifice to be earned. And that lesson, that was something I could give my kids, something better than what I'd inherited. The next weekend, we took down the last photo from the hallway that didn't belong. It was a group shot, me, Claire, Rachel, the kids, and our parents, taken years ago at the town's fall festival. Everyone was smiling, but I remembered that day too well. I had arrived late because Ella had thrown up in the car, and no one had waited. I remembered standing behind the camera, forced into position with a wet wipe still in my back pocket. Jack handed me the frame gently. "This, the last one," I nodded. "Yeah." We didn't burn it, didn't shred it. We just took it down, placed it in the box marked "Donate," and stepped back. The wall looked bare for a moment, but not empty. Clean. Then Ella ran up with a drawing crayon and marker scrawled with uneven lines and stick figures. It was the 3 of us under a big wobbly sun holding hands. She'd written our names in purple Jack. Ella, Mom, no grandparents, no cousins, no extras. "Can this go on the wall?" she asked, holding it up proudly. Jack glanced at me, grinning. "Top center." "Top center," I said. I found a magnet and pinned it on the fridge first, just until we got a proper frame. Ella clapped and Jack fist-bumped her like they'd just finished building something important. And maybe they had. Later that night, after they'd gone to bed, I stood in the hallway and stared at that blank space above the table where the old photos had once hung. I didn't feel nostalgic. I didn't feel angry. I just felt done. I wasn't erasing the past. I was choosing the present. Our present. I turned off the hallway light and walked into the quiet living room. My tea was still warm. My book lay open on the couch. Outside, the wind shifted, sending the last leaves skating across the pavement. Inside, we were exactly where we belonged. The first message came on a Tuesday, just Rachel's name lighting up my screen with a single line of text, "The house sold." No emoji, no punctuation, no "how are you," just facts. The next came a few hours later. Mom and Dad moved in with Claire. "It's a mess." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. There was nothing left to clarify, no story left to correct. The house that once held every expectation, every silence, every moment I twisted myself to fit was gone, and they had chosen once again to move into someone else's chaos rather than face their own reflection. I stood by the window that evening, cradling my mug, watching the street stay still. The porch light across the road blinked softly. Our own stayed off. The apartment smelled like vanilla and laundry detergent. Jack was reading on the couch, one leg tucked under him. Ella hummed in the bathtub, her favorite song looping quietly. It was so ordinary. And yet I felt something settle in my chest, something I didn't have a word for, but it tasted like peace. There were no more calls to return, no more obligations dressed up as tradition, no more seats at tables I was never meant to fill. Just me, my kids, this life, ours. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't bracing for the next ask. I wasn't waiting to be wanted. That night, after the kids had fallen asleep, I opened the drawer by the fridge, the one where I kept loose batteries, broken pens, and papers I didn't want to look at but couldn't throw away. The letter from my mom was still there. So was the folder Rachel had brought, full of numbers, warnings, and weight that wasn't mine to carry anymore. I didn't open either. I just moved them to the bottom of the drawer and shut it with a quiet finality. I wouldn't burn them. I wouldn't pretend they didn't exist. But I also wouldn't let them live on my countertop, taking up space meant for grocery lists and Ella's spelling tests. That drawer could hold the past. The rest of the apartment belonged to us. I made tea and sat on the couch, pulling a blanket over my knees. The hallway was dim, but I could still make out the shape of Ella's drawing taped above the table. That crooked sun. Those 3 smiling stick figures. For years, I'd chased approval in silence, hoping if I gave enough, stayed quiet enough, proved myself enough, I'd earn my place. I thought love was something you bought with sacrifice. But not anymore. Jack stirred in his sleep, rolled toward the back of the couch, and let out a quiet breath. I smiled. This wasn't the life I thought I'd have. But it was the one I chose, and in that quiet, ordinary moment, it felt like everything I'd ever needed had been here all along, once I stopped waiting for permission to belong. The porch light stayed off. Winter came quietly that year. No invitations, no group texts, no last-minute emergencies disguised as family updates. Just snowfall that blanketed the street in silence and a home that no longer carried the weight of expectation. We didn't decorate much, just a small tree the kids picked out themselves, a few paper stars taped to the window. Ella called it ours, Jack added finally, and I realized they weren't mourning what we left behind. They were celebrating what we'd built. I used to believe being needed was the same as being loved, that my value came from what I gave, not who I was, that if I stayed useful, I'd stay wanted, but survival isn't the same as belonging, and peace. Peace comes when you stop showing up where you're only seen in pieces. So if you've ever sat at the edge of your own family, hoping to be invited closer, if you've ever held your breath through holidays waiting for someone to notice your absence, if you've ever been treated like a tool instead of a person, let this be your reminder. You are allowed to outgrow people who only loved the version of you that stayed quiet. You don't owe access to those who only call when they're in crisis. You are not selfish for protecting your peace. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away with both hands free. And if this story feels like yours, leave the porch light off. We'll understand.